All right, let's settle in. We're going to dive into some sources today that open up a pretty fascinating area, the 12 laws of the universe,
Mm,
specifically as Kenneth Wong presents them.
that's right. And the material, it describes these less as hard science, physics laws, and more as metaphysical principles,
Yeah.
frameworks, really, coming out of spiritual and new thought ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And our goal for this deep dive, it's pretty straightforward. Based only on the source material we've got in front of us, we just want to unpack these concepts. What are they? What are they supposed to mean?
Hmm.
And crucially, how are they presented as like applicable tools for navigating life, energy, maybe even personal growth? It's really about understanding the system as it's laid out in the source.
Exactly. We're looking at the concepts themselves, how they're described, their internal logic, you could say, and the uses Wong suggests for them.
Okay, so let's just jump in. Let's look at these 12 laws following the structure we have from the source. What's kind of interesting right away is how they seem to, well, connect to each other or offer different angles on reality through this specific lens,
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is how the source kind of lays down a foundational principle right at the start.
which takes us straight to the first one, the law of divine oneness. The source explains this as the idea that everything, absolutely everything, is interconnected. It's all linked through one single underlying energy source.
Right. Whether you call it source, God, the universe, the name doesn't seem to be the point. The point is, from this spiritual view, nothing's really separate. People, nature, what happens, it's all part of this one unified thing.
And if you follow that logic, the application the source suggests makes sense, right? It flows from that connection,
Oh.
realizing that your actions, your thoughts, even just your energy, well, it impacts the whole system.
Because we're all linked. If it's all one energy field, then what one part does naturally influences the rest.
And that tees up the next one perfectly, doesn't it? The law of vibration.
Mm-hmm.
So if everything is this connected energy, then the source argues that everything tangible stuff, but also intangible things like your thoughts, your feelings, it's all energy and it's all vibrating
Yeah.
constantly, just at different frequencies.
Yeah, and the source links higher vibrations with, positive states, happiness, love, that sort of thing, and lower vibrations with more negative states.
Okay, so the immediate question is how do you use that? What does the source say?
Well, the material suggests that if you want to attract better experiences, you actually need to consciously raise your vibration.
Wow.
The guidance points towards things like cultivating positive thoughts, actively practicing gratitude, taking actions that feel, well, positive and aligned. It basically frames your inner state as something you can actively tune, like an energetic dial.
Okay, so your internal vibration is key. Then the outside world must somehow reflect that, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly where the law of correspondence comes in. The source describes this with that classic phrase, as within, so without, meaning your external reality is presented as a direct mirror of what's going on inside you.
So, if things feel chaotic internally, the source suggests you'll see chaos externally. Inner peace, on the other hand, reflects as outer harmony.
The implication for applying it seems pretty direct then.
Yeah, the source suggests the path isn't really fighting the external stuff directly. It's about working on the inner self first, your thoughts, emotions, your deep seated beliefs. The change, according to this law anyway, has to start inside.
And this is where I think it gets really intriguing for a lot of people, because correspondence seems to set the stage perfectly for the law of attraction.
Ah, yes, the big one for many.
Right. The source defines it pretty much how you'd expect.
Mm.
Like attracts like. It says your overall energy, which is a mix of your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, acts like a magnet,
Mm-hmm.
drawing experiences and situations and even things to you that kind of match its frequency. Positive energy pulls in positive results. Negative energy attracts, well, challenges.
And the application offered sounds simple, but maybe isn't easy in practice. Focus your attention, your energy, your feelings on what you do want, not on what you're afraid of.
Right. The source presents that focused attention as the actual mechanism for manifestation, for making things happen under this law.
But it's not just about sitting and thinking. The source immediately follows attraction with the law-inspired action.
Ah, okay. So action is involved.
Yes, but with a specific flavor. It suggests manifestation needs action, but it should feel inspired. It needs to feel aligned with your true self or with that source energy we talked about.
Inspired action. How does the source define that? How is it different from just doing stuff?
It seems to be about listening to your intuition, those gut feelings or nudges that feel authentic and right, rather than forcing things based on say, fear or a rigid plan somebody else gave you.
So the application is more about tuning in.
Exactly. Trust those intuitive hits. Take the steps that feel resonant and natural rather than just, grinding away for the sake of activity.
That adds a really important layer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, moving through the list. Next is the law of perpetual transmutation of energy.
Mm-hmm. This one's about change.
The source explains that energy isn't static. It's always moving, always transforming, always evolving. And crucially, it suggests that negative energy isn't fixed. It can be consciously transmuted, changed into positive energy.
And that applies to situations too, right? They can shift based on how you direct or transform the energy involved.
So how do you apply that? It sounds powerful.
Well, the source presents it as you having the ability to shift your own perspective or deliberately change your energy state to actually alter a situation. Like, think about feeling really frustrated. That's intense negative energy. The idea is you could consciously channel that intensity into determined motivation.
Okay, so it's an active internal kind of energy work, alchemy almost.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Within this framework, at least.
Okay, building on this idea that our energy and actions have real effects, we get to a very familiar one, the law of cause and effect.
Yep, karma, basically, in this context.
The source frames it very simply. Every action is a cause, and every cause produces a corresponding effect. No exceptions. Your thoughts, your words, your deeds, they're presented as the direct architects of the outcomes you experience.
It's essentially the principle of accountability, but framed as a universal law. The source really emphasizes being mindful, being conscious of your choices and your mindset, because those are the things driving the reality you encounter.
And flowing directly from cause and effect, naturally we get the law of compensation.
Which the source sums up nicely as you reap what you sow.
Right. The energy, the effort, the value, whatever you put out into the world is said to come back to you. Maybe not in the exact same form, but it returns as opportunities or good relationships or abundance.
And the suggested application, the source frames it as about giving generously, giving authentically. It's presented almost as an act of faith in this universal mechanism of return, trusting that the value you contribute will be compensated somehow.
Interesting. Okay, now the laws seem to shift a bit more towards perception and how we interpret things. We hit the law of relativity.
Yeah, this one's key in the source material. The idea is that everything is relative. Your perception isn't just one factor. The source implies it actually shapes your reality.
So challenges, difficulties, even things you might think of as objective facts or truths, they're subjective, dependent on your viewpoint.
Pretty much. According to this law, yes. And the source puts a high value on prioritizing your own inner peace over getting tangled up in arguing about external truth.
Okay, but how do you apply that when something genuinely feels difficult?
The source suggests reframing. One technique mentioned is comparing your current problem to, say, much worse scenarios to gain perspective, or deliberately focusing on gratitude, shifting your attention. The goal isn't always to fix the external thing immediately, but to shift your internal view to maintain peace, because the situation's impact is relative to how you see it.
That reframing technique.
Yeah.
You can see how that might work in practice.
Okay.
Okay, law number 10, the law of polarity.
Duality. Everything has an opposite.
Exactly. The source states everything exists with its opposite. Light, dark, good, bad, up, down, problem, and solution. The very existence of duality implies that inside every challenge, there's a potential positive flip side, a hidden opposite.
So the application the source suggests is, when you're facing something tough, don't just stare at the problem. Actively look for that other pole.
Seek out the hidden opportunity, or the lesson, or the potential solution that must exist because the problem exists.
That seems to be the idea. Acknowledge the difficulty, but immediately start searching for its inherent positive counterpart.
Makes sense. Okay, 11. The law of rhythm.
Ah, the cycles of life.
Yeah, the source points out that life, just like nature, moves in cycles. The seasons, the tides, day and night, they're these natural rhythms, growth and rest, success and struggle, things expanding then contracting. The source presents these ups and downs as just inevitable, part of how things work.
And the application, how does the source say to handle these rhythms?
Through acceptance, mostly, and patience. Embrace the ebbs and flows. Understand that the tough times, they're part of the cycle. They will pass. Just like the good times won't last forever either, but they'll cycle back around. It's about trying to flow with that natural tide instead of fighting it.
Gotcha. Riding the waves rather than trying to stop the ocean.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final one, number 12, the law of gender.
Now, the source is really clear here. This isn't about biological sex.
Right, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's about fundamental energies the source labels as masculine and feminine that are said to exist in everything.
Yeah.
It gives examples like action and decisiveness as masculine energy.
And intuition, creativity, receptivity as feminine energy. Logic versus feeling, perhaps.
Yeah, those kinds of complementary forces.
Yeah.
And the source suggests that real harmony, getting optimal results in life, comes from having a balance between these two energies.
So the application isn't about being male or female, it's about internal integration.
Exactly. The source encourages you to cultivate both kinds of energy within yourself, regardless of your biology. Be able to take action when needed, but also be open to intuition. Use logic, but also embrace creativity. Wholeness, according to this law, comes from integrating and balancing these forces inside.
Okay, so that's the full set of 12 as laid out by Wang in the source material.
Yeah. Taken together, they're presented as this kind of philosophical toolkit, aren't they? For, personal growth,
Yeah.
becoming more self-aware, maybe even for conscious manifestation, as the source calls it.
And the source does mention they're quite popular in certain spiritual communities, valued for encouraging mindfulness and living more intentionally.
But, and this is important to reiterate based on the source itself, these are presented as conceptual frameworks, metaphysical ideas, not as universally accepted scientific principles like, say, gravity.
Absolutely. They're offered as one specific way, one lens, to view how your inner world, your energy, and your external experiences might interact, all within that metaphysical context Wang describes.
It's definitely a fascinating system of thought to explore, just understanding how it's put together and how it's intended to be used within its own logic.
For sure. Regardless of whether you personally buy into it or not, understanding the framework as it's presented in the source is pretty crucial to grasping what it's trying to say.
So as you're thinking about all these concepts we've just unpacked, here's maybe a final thought to mull over, pulling directly from these ideas. If your external reality really does mirror your internal state, like the law of correspondence suggests, and if your perception fundamentally shapes that reality, as the law of relativity posits, well, how drastically could shifting your inner world, just your thoughts, your feelings, your perspective, how much could that actually change the landscape you experience every single day?
That's a powerful question to sit with.
It really is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive today.